Hej venner. Jeg håber, I har det godt, og jeg glæder mig enormt meget til at se jer næste torsdag allerede, så det nærmer sig. Jeg tænkte, jeg vil give jer en lille intro til kurset, og lige lægge et slags fundament, kunne man måske kalde det, til hele kurset i virkeligheden. Men måske særligt her til første gang, hvor vi mødes. Så vi lige har sådan en fælles ramme. Så ja, jeg håber, I kan nå at se det, og hvis ikke, så går det nok også. Så kan det være, at vi lige introducerer lidt igen. Det gør vi nok lige meget af næste torsdag. Ja, jeg har tænkt mig at prøve at gøre det på engelsk, fordi der er nogle engelsktalende, der gerne vil lytte med på den teoretiske del. Ja, jeg er sådan en lille smule usikker på, hvordan det går. Om jeg synes, det bliver for anstrengende. Om I synes, det bliver anstrengende at lytte til mit gebrokne engelsk. Men ja, lad os prøve at se, hvordan det går. Så nu tager den derfra. Ja, jeg er lidt nervøs, skal jeg mærke. Det er mærkeligt at sidde her foran skærmen igen og tale til mig selv. Det virker det som om. Men jeg tror, jeg skal prøve at huske på, at I er derude et sted, og I lytter med. Ja, så det er sådan, det er sådan, jeg har det. Samtidig er jeg vildt spændt og glæder mig rigtig meget. Og jeg føler bare sådan, der er sådan en masse idéer og masse ting, jeg gerne vil dele. Måske nok også for meget, jeg gerne vil dele. Så der er sådan en energi, der sådan føles af sådan en boble over. Ja. Så jeg håber ikke, at det bliver for overvældende og bliver for indforstået, og det bliver for meget. Eller så må I jeg har prøvet at begrænse mig. Ja, så lad os kaste os ud i det. Se på nogle slides. Sådan. Og så er ikke der, vi skulle starte. Vi skulle starte fra begyndelsen. Sådan. Yes, så tager jeg den på engelsk herfra. So, in search of Sophia, it's called, this expedition we're gonna embark on, our imaginal exploration of Jung's myth for our age, our time, our apocalyptic time, you could add. So that's the title, and hopefully it's gonna become more clear as we go along why I chose to call it this. So, an introduction. What is Jung's myth for our time, we could ask. And what is this time that we're living in? I think my motivation for doing this expedition is very much in a sort of attempt to respond to the events that's going on in the world right now, and try to ask myself kind of like, why is the Jungian stuff relevant in this age and time that we're living in? The Red Book is written over 100 years ago. Why is that still relevant to read and to engage with? What does it have to teach us? And what does it have to offer? We could ask. And then another feeling is, I guess that's the way that I've sort of like perceived and framed our time, perhaps because I knew a little bit about the perspective that Jung is bringing on our time, but I had this sense that, Jungian disregarded that we are living in an apocalyptic time, like there's this feeling like really, if I also just try to look away from my sort of Jungian colored perspective, then like what I see around me and what I hear people talking about around me is also a sense that we're living in the end of times. And that might be a natural consequence of the climate change and this feeling that we are facing like tremendous um, changes, to say it mildly. We could also call it like more catastrophic, sort of almost cataclysmic events. A feeling that um, a lot of, not just the climate, but also politically, economically, socially, that we are facing like a series of crises. Um, you could also say we're facing a series of collapses. Something is falling apart. Like the sort of like the Western progressive narrative of liberal democracy and capitalism. I think that's really being questioned today. So so it does feel like, wow, okay, we are living in a time where things are falling apart, where things are collapsing. Um, but also, and this is actually the true meaning of apocalypse, or apocalypses, is where things are becoming visible, where things are being uncovered, where things are being unveiled. This is actually the meaning of apocalypse when you look at the word. That's why we also have like the translation apocalypse, like the book of Revelation, for example, something is being revealed. So it's not just like the apocalypse. When I say apocalypse and apocalyptic, I don't mean like a doomsday sort of feeling that that you usually associate with apocalypse, but I also mean it in the sense of kind of, okay, what is being uncovered at this time that we're living in, what is being shown, what is being visible, becoming visible. Um, so all these events, all these images that I have here, like the war in Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, immigration crises, climate crises. We have an election coming up. We have two very important elections coming up. The European Parliament, where at the moment it seems like the right wing will have quite a good election, which will put an end to many more progressive initiatives and green initiatives in the Parliament. And then, not least, we have the American election coming up, where Trump, yeah, I don't know what to say. It's so astonishing that he's actually right now in a position to become the Republican candidate, and that he will have a good chance of winning the election as well. Taking into the consideration how it ended the last time. So it feels like, wow, okay, what is going on here? Like, yeah, and how can we understand these events? And yeah, I could have picked many other events also, but these were just the images that in my mind are quite pressing at the time. Um, and of course, all these images contain a myriad of images in them that we could dive into. But not to lose ourselves in the crises of our time. Let's try to understand sort of the roots of this meta crisis, we could call it, like, or at least like from a Jungian perspective, what is the cause? What is the root? Not just from a Jungian perspective, but perhaps also from a more like philosophical perspective. Um, so that's actually the first thing that they will try to dig into in the course, is trying to get a sense of like, how did we end up in this situation? What is the sort of like the root cause of some of these problems that we're facing? and it's not to say that there's just the one route that we can sort of get at it and understand. There are, of course, many routes. It's a whole network of mycelia, you could say. But I do think that there's a way of understanding this from a deeper perspective, which takes us to philosophy, takes us to Heidegger, takes us to the Jungian stuff. So let's just look at it. I'm gonna really try to focus this introduction around an article that was published in this anthology called Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul under Postmodern Conditions. And this is actually the first article in the first volume. It's written by one of the editors, Thomas Arts, who's unfortunately died a few years ago. And then Murray Stein also is the other editor. And I really like the title of this book, and also the sort of like the intention of the book is sort of like to ask, like, why is Jung's Red Book relevant for this specific time that we're living in? If we try to kind of like look at it a bit synchronistically, like, is there a reason or like a meaning behind the Red Book being published in 2009? You know, it's been lying there for so many years in this bank vault and the family's protection in Zurich. Now it's being released and published in 2009, and this time, you know, and how does it speak to post-modernity? I think this is a really interesting question, and this is a question that they try to explore in this anthology. So just some question that came to me, like, why is Jung important today? Why and how does his ideas speak to us? And what is his myth for our time? I really like this idea that, you know, the Jungian stuff is not just like psychology as we usually understand psychology. Like, it's a new myth, it's a new worldview. It's not like a scientific theory that, you know, it, like, it is also that, but it's also something else and something more. Because, like, if we just look at it as a scientific theory, as a psychology, as we usually understand it, it might not get at these root causes for our crises, which has to do with the loss of the mythic, the loss of the narrative and the symbolic. So we have to understand Jung also not just as a psychologist who thinks that symbols are important, but we have to look at the whole Jungian framework, the whole Jungian theory as itself a myth. And that also takes away some of this kind of like, oh, we have to understand Jung in the right way, and we have to kind of think our way too. Like, no, we have to give a sense of what is the myth, what is the meaning in his, what is the worldview that he's putting forth and discovering in the Red Book. And what does this myth have to do with Sophia? We might finally ask. I'm not gonna answer that right now, but hopefully that will become clear during the course. But just to say, like, very briefly, in the Book of Revelation, Sophia is quite an important figure. So she actually appears in the Book of Revelation. We're gonna look at that when we get to Answer to Job, Jung's sort of, it's a quite central work. I was just about to say the central work of Jungian, but I think that would be to put too much on it. But it is such an interesting text that I'm really looking forward to digging into with you. So okay, this is a bit of the motivation for my sort of for my interest in this topic and where I'm coming from. So just to look briefly at this loss of the mythic, loss of the symbolic. Like it's quite clear that we lost sort of like a meta narrative, which we could call the Christian myth. That was what Nietzsche referred to when he said that God is dead. This is like the Christian narrative is no longer viable. And we have to understand the way that the Christian narrative was kind of like something which bound a culture and a civilization together and provided this overarching sense of meaning and of being situated in the world, and of being at home in the world somehow, even though the Christian myth was very much about that we're just passing through on earth and that we're heading back toward God and the heaven, that it was in a way world and life denying, as Nietzsche would put it. It still gave us a sense of a meaningful universe. Let's put it like that. So now that this myth, the Christian myth, has eroded, there is a sense of like being homeless and being without a central living myth. And this, this really exposes us in a way to what Nietzsche also called nihilism, to a sort of nihilistic, materialistic worldview in which we live in a meaningless universe, and like the only way to fill that emptiness is by consuming, a sort of hedonistic sort of like, let's just try to make ourselves as comfortable as possible and everything will, that's the meaning of life. Sort of like just materialistic well-being. So there's a sort of like a lack of a deeper meaning, which I think we can all recognize around us and in us. So I think this also kind of like, at least that's Thomas Arthur's idea, is like that this sort of engenders a search for transcendence, a search for meaning, to withstand this undertow of postmodernism, he calls it. This is also perhaps like illustrated by what Max Weber called the iron cage of modernity, that we live inside like a cage of like, which is built up on like a very sort of rational, instrumental way of relating to ourselves and the world, that the rationality, when it's not connected to the heart, to the emotions, to the deeper senses, and to a deeper sense of meaning and purpose, and to the irrational, to the unconscious, you could say, it sort of like feels like we're being trapped in a cage, when we're losing connection, when we're losing touch with the ground of being, with the unconscious. But we'll explore this in more detail. So Lyotard, sort of like, yeah, I guess you could say the inventor of the word, the concept of postmodernism. He describes it as follows: the narrative function is losing its functors, its great hero, its great dangers, its great voyages, its great goal. That's the mythic. We are losing touch with these bigger, deeper narratives, great voyages. It is being dispersed in clouds of narrative language. Narrative, it's not that we don't have a narrative, but the narrative, according to Lyotard, is also denotative, prescriptive, descriptive, and so on, conveyed within each cloud are pragmatic buoyancies specific to each kind. Each of us lives at the intersection of many of these. So what is the shift? It's not that, we're now living in a world where there are no narratives. No, there are plenty of narratives, but the narratives are changing from being like mythic and connected to these archetypal symbolic layers to the unconscious, and instead becoming more instrumental, um, sort of prescriptive and descriptive. What does that mean? That perhaps mean that when we go to the doctor, for example, we get told, you should take this medicine. That's prescriptive, Or when we go to the fitness center, you should buy this protein powder and you should do these exercises. And then that's a narrative around being fit, but it's not a narrative that connects us with something deeper. It's a narrative that is like instrumental, and it's prescriptive. That means like Foucault would call this biopower. It's a sort of like it's a narrative with power in it, because it's sort of like it pertains to knowledge, and knowledge is also power. So there's this like this mixture of knowledge and power and narrative, which sort of immerses us in these narrative power structures, which we are then entrapped in, and sort of like driven by, you could say. And if we take it like to the extreme in a sort of like structuralist view, then we are those narratives actually. That is the subject. The subject is always being subjectified by these narratives, sort of constellated in a specific way. But yeah, we'll get to this in more detail next time. So what is this loss of a myth? What is this shift of losing a myth? Edward Edinger, who was a quite prominent Jungian scholar, he wrote some quite influential books. He put it like this: it is evident to thoughtful people that Western society no longer has a viable, functioning myth. Indeed, all world cultures are approaching, to a greater or lesser extent, the state of mythlessness. The breakdown of a central myth is like the shattering of a vessel containing a precious essence. Meaning is lost. So I like this idea of looking at a myth as a vessel for containing the spirit, for containing the precious essence. So when that vessel is no longer there, like the archetypal energies, the spirit, like it's still there, but it doesn't have like a container for being transformed. So it's kind of like acted out and spilled out in a way that's much more raw, archaic, sort of unindividuated, untransformed, archaic energies are being loosed and being spilled out. Whereas when you have a container, you can work with some of these energies and transform them, so they get an expression that is more constructive. So that's at least the sort of like the Jungian take on many of the sort of events that's going on in our time. So we could look like the archetypal energies are sort of as being acted out in the world, these deep collective energies of rage, aggression, war. These energies need sort of like a vessel in order to be transformed. It's a bit like the difference between going out in the street and picking a fight with someone just because you need to lose that energy, or to kind of free that energy, or rather to take that energy into the sort of like the karate sendo, and having a discipline of working with that energy and cultivating it and harnessing it in a way that's like that's contained and yeah, constructive. So there is this loss of the symbolic. According to Jung, this is actually the reason why psychology was made possible at all, because previous ages, they sort of just lived their symbols. For them, the universe was symbolic. So there was no reason why to kind of look inward in order to discover the symbolics. They were in the psyche, they were in the symbolic. Um, so um, so um, so this is how Jung puts it quite poetically. In our age, heaven has become for us the cosmic space of the physicist. Instead of the gods and the planets and the entire universe being filled with meaning and the gods, now we look out and into empty space. There's a nothingness. And the divine empyrean, a fair memory of things that once were. But the heart glows, and a secret unrest gnaws at the roots of our being. But the heart glows, and a secret unrest gnaws at the roots of our being. What is this unrest? What is this heart that is glowing? We feel that something is missing. We feel that we're losing touch with the symbolic. We feel that there must be a more sort of enchanted way to be in this universe. And there's all this energy, in the below ground, so to speak, that is like gnawing, and that wants to come out, wants to, it's a bit like we talked about in the cacao ceremony this Sunday, with the sort of like the spring emerging. It feels like winter, it's been all this energy has been germinating in the ground, and now it feels like something is just below the surface. Everything is ready to sprout and come out. So that could be an image for looking at that. What is it that wants to come out? So according to Jung, because the spiritual has been denied by this materialistic culture that we live in, the spirit doesn't go away. It's just like waiting below ground, so to speak, and knocking at the door, he calls it, waiting to emerge, waiting to be embodied, waiting to be incarnated, waiting to be integrated also into the collective consciousness. So this would be one way of looking at our time. Again, Thomas Art writes, many pathologies of our age emerge from the lack of having an alchemistic vessel to integrate these archetypal spiritual energies into the social-cultural context. If the individual or society denies these energies the chance for expression, they will turn to confusion, destruction, and violence. Mercurius duplex. And for those who don't know Mercurius duplex, he's the god of the alchemists. And the thing about Mercurius is that he has this double nature, that he's both good and bad, light and dark. He's a trickster character. He can go both ways. The same with the spirit, according to Jung, that there's always two sides. There's always the light and the dark. So the good and the bad. And when we sort of like when we forget about or actively repress the dark, the bad, the ugly, it will play out behind our backs, so to speak. So that's really, again, to repeat myself perhaps, the function of the vessel, which is the mystic. We could look at it as this alchemistic vessel, in which these energies of the archetypes are being transformed, being worked on. So that's really the first part of the course. Is an exploration of this kind of like, okay, where are we today? What is this, meta crisis that we're facing? The other aspect of that is like a questioning into kind of like, okay, what is a myth then, and why do we need the mythic, and how are we losing connection with the mythic? So that's the first kind of like, okay, the meta crisis, how can we understand that, and how can we understand the mythic in regard to that? That's the first 2 times, and then from there we're gonna dig into Jung's myth, and really try to look at, okay, what is this myth then that Jung proposes, and that will take us straight into Ion. And that's actually, it's something that Jung sort of discovers in the Red Book, you could say, or sort of like gets in touch with during the Red Book. But then he really like hesitates in a way, and he's quite in doubt about whether to sort of reveal his knowledge, his secret knowledge. But then, he has this near-death experience in 1944, and during that near-death experience, he has quite a lot of visions. And then after that experience, he's kind of like confirmed that he has to express some of his secret knowledge. So that's Ion. It's an incredible, fascinating book. It's also a huge volume, quite dense. But we're just gonna look at one chapter of Ion, which I think is a sort of like the central chapter of Ion, where Jung sort of lays out his project. So yeah, to repeat myself, Ion can be read as a commentary on his experience during the Red Book. And actually, the very first painting that's in the Red Book is this capital letter, calligraphic letter, the D. And in this painting, it's quite remarkable actually that so much is contained in this one little opening image. Actually, the whole Jungian myth in a way is contained here. So we could just look at this image and then from there, like, but yeah, I'm gonna leave it here, the image, for you to look at. But just very briefly to say, if you look, I don't know if you can, I'm gonna move my video. If you look at the top of the image, you can see the different astrological signs, and there you can see the sun moving from Pisces into the sign of Aquarius. So that's the idea, the astrological idea that we are moving between astrological signs. So after about 2,150 years, the Christian era, the Piscean age, is coming to an end, and humanity is now facing an epochal period of transition, the dawning of a new age. So that's, that's very central to the Jungian myth. And I know that many of us might have this resistance towards, astrology, and it has a lot of connotations with like New Age movements. And I think, it might be interesting for us to explore kind of like, okay, how can we engage with this idea of astrology as myth, as synchronicity, as worldview, and and how can we, distinguish also the Jungian from the New Age? I think that's quite important. It's not to sort of like bash the New Age and say that it's all just a piece of rubbish, but I do think it's important to distinguish the Jungian from the New Age because they differ in some quite important and fundamental ways, I think. So there is a lot of kind of like what do you call it? Confusing Jung with the New Age. I think about Hanegraaff, also this Dutch historian of esotericism. He also equates Jung with the New Age, and I think that's a mistake, or at least that needs some nuancing that we're gonna look at also. So the idea that we are entering a new age, which is the age of Aquarius, is quite fundamental to Ion and quite fundamental to Jung's myth. So looking at these astronomical phenomena with an acausal synchronistic approach, Jung saw that humanity is on the threshold of a new age, the Aquarian age. Within this difficult phase of aeonal transition, immense difficulty can be expected. Jung perceived that these epochal transitions between Platonic months go hand in hand with what he called a metamorphosis of the god. The period of transition between eons is therefore always accompanied by pronounced anxiety, confusion, and melancholy. This is Jung in one of his letters. Transitions between the eons always seem to have been melancholy and despairing times, as for instance the collapse of the Old Kingdom in Egypt between Taurus and Aries, or the melancholy of the Augustan age between Aries and Pisces. And we are now moving into Aquarius. We are only at the beginning of this apocalyptic development. So this is also what makes our time apocalyptic, is this feeling that we are sort of ending an era, ending an epoch, and we don't know what will follow in the next epoch. And there's a sense of confusion and anxiety and melancholy connected with these transitions that I think, I recognize that in our time, and feel like that's perhaps a way to look at our time that's quite interesting. Disregarding the truth claim, is this perspective interesting? That that we are in this transition. How does that impact our way of being in this time and of acting in this time and then engaging with this time, responding to this time? Does it give us a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose and a sense of being connected with something larger? For me, it does. And we need to, I think personally, I need to explore in what way it doesn't. But I think there's something to that perspective which is quite interesting, and which I would love to sort of explore with you. So just again to look at our time from this perspective of transitions between epochs. Jung goes on to state in one of his letters, the development with its seemingly nihilistic trend towards disintegration must be understood as the symptom and symbol of a mood of universal destruction and renewal that has set its mark on our age. The mood makes itself felt everywhere, politically, socially, philosophically. We are living in what the Greek calls the kairos, the right moment for a metamorphosis of the gods, of the fundamental principles and symbols. This peculiarity of our time, which is certainly not of our conscious choosing, is the expression of the unconscious man within us who is changing. Coming generations will have to take into account this momentous transformation if humanity is not to destroy itself through the might of its own technology and science. Super rich quote, I feel. A lot that we could dig into there, but this idea of the kairos, I think that's such a important concept, also quite important concept in newer philosophy. We speak about eventual philosophy, for example, like it's a sort of like a different feeling of time. It's a sort of more like a synchronistic feeling of time, that this is the like sort of like the event, the right moment, and perhaps there's a bit of grandiosity in that, that it could be kind of, but there's also this feeling like now is the time. We're living in these like extreme interesting times. Like if we sort of look at it from this meta perspective, it's quite remarkable and quite fascinating, the times that we're living in. There's a sense of collapse, but there's also a sense of wow, the possibilities, and being witness to this transition, this event, this kairos, is quite unique, you could say, quite singular. So I guess that's my feeling also with this time that we're living in, the sort of the atrocity and the catastrophe, and feeling the grief and anger and pessimism connected to that, but at the same time also feeling this, wow, okay, this is so interesting, and the possibilities and the shifts and the transitions that it opens to is also part of that picture. And then this idea of a metamorphosis of the gods, I really like that image as well. Also, that's so fundamental to the Jungian perspective, that this is not of our choosing, as he says. It's a sort of like the gods that are changing, the gods that are shifting, the gods that are transforming. So there's something deeper, there's something in the unconscious which is out of our hands, but in which we can turn toward and engage with and cooperate with. And this transformation of the God, it's not our choosing, it's not our doing, but it calls for our cooperation, our engagement, in order for that transformation to happen. And this is necessary if we're not, to destroy ourselves. So that would be also very central to Jung's idea that the gods needs us in order for the transformation to happen. So that's something we will look into in the second part of the introduction. I'm just gonna take a break and invite you to do the same. It's a long time just speaking into the screen on my own. So let's take a break.